Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
Welcome back to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury. When someone falls behind with the IRS, one of the most alarming moments is discovering that their bank account has frozen. It can happen without warning, and it can turn an ordinary day into a financial emergency. I'm Evan Mack, and today Lance is walking us through what IRS bank levy actually looks like and what steps people can take the moment it happens. Lance, sir, welcome.
Good to see you, Evan. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Good to see you too, Lance. For someone who has never dealt with this IRS enforcement before, what does it mean when the IRS freezes a bank account?
Well, that means that you don't have access to any of the monies that were in the account on the day the levy hits. Now, that's for the IRS. You need to check with the state because I can tell you in the state of Missouri that that levy not only attaches to the monies that are in the account on the day the levy hits the bank, but to any monies that come in afterwards. And state levies are normally for 180 days. That's by state Supreme Court rule in the state of Missouri. So if you're in a different state, you need to check on that because it's possible then that any monies you put in after that date are subject to levy as well. But with the IRS, it's only good the day that it hits. You don't have any access to the monies. Now, what differs this from a wage levy is that levy is only good for the day that it hits. And you have 21 days to try to get that levy lifted before the bank has to send the monies to the IRS. And it's a one-time deal, like I said. Now, that doesn't mean that the IRS cannot set up successive bank levies, and they will do that. But for that time, it's only good for that. So they can only take out as much monies as in the account or as much monies as the levy states that they're seeking. So, if you got $2,000 in your bank account, the levy's for $1,500, they can only come after $1,500.
So, like, how much notice does IRS usually give before taking this kind of action?
Well, there's no notice, but there is a whole sequence of letters that the IRS is required to send out before they can levy you. And if you ignore those last letters, there's a final notice of intent to levy. That's an LT11 letter or CP90. You do nothing, then the IRS is free to wipe out your bank account or to garnish your wages. So it's not going to happen the very next day, and it could happen, in a few weeks, or it could happen in a few months. But eventually, it's going to happen. So don't ignore those letters, because once that final notice of intent to levy is sent to the taxpayer and more than 30 days has passed, the IRS is free to levy against you and to take the monies in your bank account.
So, Lance, when this freeze occurs, how much control does a taxpayer have, over their money in their account?
Well, they don't have any control for the first 21 days or until they get the levy lifted for the monies that are subject to the levy, because that account is frozen. You do not have access. The good news, though, is, as I said, the bank doesn't send in that money for 21 days. So you have that interim period there before the monies are actually sent to the IRS, where you can negotiate with the IRS to get that levy lifted in whole and in part. But again, you have to prove financial hardship. And if they wipe out your bank account, it's not very hard to prove that you're not going to be able to pay all the bills, that you need that money. And so you can get that done, but you really need a professional to do that, because if you do it on your own, the IRS is just going to eat you up and spit you out. You do not want to talk to the IRS yourself. They take advantage of lay people. They don't tell you how the game is played. They can't do that with the tax professional.
People often think that this levy is permanent. What actually happens during this whole period? How long could it possibly last for a potential person?
Well, now the bank levy is only good. It's a one-time levy. And the bank has to hold those monies for 21 days. You can't access those monies. And after 21 days, it goes to the IRS. Then it's done. But the IRS can still issue successive bank levies. And during that 21-day period, you still have time to call the IRS and to try to get that levy lifted in whole or in part. So the ball game's not over. Once that levy hits your bank account, you still have time, but you better hurry up because the clock's running.
Yeah, and speaking of that clock, though, Lance, what immediate steps can someone take once they discovered their account has been frozen?
Well, they need to hire a tax professional, and they need then to have that tax professional. We'll send them a financial statement. They'll go through it. It's going to be a lot of time because nobody fills out those financial statements completely right the first time. Then you're going to need documentation for certain areas of expenses. Then the tax professional can call the IRS and try to get that levy lifted in whole or in part.
Hmm. A bank levy can disrupt the payroll, bills, daily life. What happens? What helps prevent the situation from snowballing into something even worse than this freeze?
Well, you need to get an agreement set up with the IRS.
Hmm.
Once you have an agreement set up with the IRS, they're not going to levy you as long as you're making that monthly payment on that agreement. And secondly, you do not incur any additional debt because one of the conditions of any agreement with the IRS is that you're going to be 100% compliant moving forward. And that not only means that you're going to pay on that installment agreement that you set up, but that means you're going to pay your payroll taxes on time. You're going to make your estimated tax payments on your income taxes on time. If you do all that, then you're 100% compliant moving forward. Or guess what? They're going to default you on the agreement and then they're free to levy you again.
Yeah, but Lance, what information do people need to gather? After this freeze happens, after they discover this freeze, what should they gather up?
Well, the IRS has a farm, and the farm is basically your assets, your liabilities, your income, and expenses. Now, obviously, they're going to want more information. They're going to want to know the routing number and all of that information for the bank account, who the bank's with, what the balance is in the account. You're going to have to give them all that information, like your car payments, who's it with, what's your monthly payment, how much equity you have in the car, those type of things. That's the type of financial information that you need. And then for certain categories of expenses, the IRS has what's called the national standards. So for different categories of expenses, the IRS comes up with a list as to how much you should incur in expense. For example, housing and utilities. Every county in the US is different. Plus, it depends on the number of people in the household. However, their number is so arbitrarily low that 80 to 90% of our clients exceed that number. Well, you can still get that if you're in the automated collection system, your actual expense, but you have to prove that to the IRS. So we got to go through bank statements, credit card statements, debit card statements to prove to the IRS that your actual expenses exceed the national standards. And then you can be given credit by the IRS for your actual expenses in determining whether or not that levy should be lifted.
Hmm. Lance, you helped a lot of clients, through bank levies and things like that. Can you share a story about someone who came to you in this situation and what kind of made the difference in you getting their money released?
Well, I didn't do this personally, but one of my attorneys did this. It was in the state of Illinois.
Hmm.
They were a business, they owed over $1 million.
Mm.
And before they hired me, they hired a firm in Colorado. They paid them $30,000. And it's obvious from what they told me that the revenue officer would send them out a summary of taxpayer contact. It's called a Form 9297. They would want all this financial information. And instead of sending it to the taxpayer right away, they would send it at the last minute. And this went on and on. And finally, the revenue officer just levied them. Two levies. One was in excess of $1 million. So they drive to my St. Genevieve office. It's an hour away. They're like a half hour from St. Louis. And again, we talked to them, and the guy said, "Well, can you guarantee me you'll get the levy lifted?" I said, "No, I can't do that. I can't give anybody any guarantees. I can tell you that we have a good track record with this,
Hmm.
but some of it depends upon the revenue officer and all that." So at 7 o'clock the next morning, they called, they retained my services. By the end of that workday, both levies had been lifted. In a month's time, we negotiated a settlement because when you get a revenue officer involved, they want everything. They want it now. You got to drop everything else because if you don't get it to them, they're going to levy again.
Mhm.
And so they ended up paying about 25, 30 cents on the dollar on that $1 million plus debt over time. They were ecstatic. Now they paid me more than $30,000, but they said it was well worth it because they spent 30,000 on somebody who didn't do anything for them.
Amazing. Amazing stuff. And Lance, for someone listening who fears their account could be next, what's the most important step they can take now to avoid that freeze altogether?
You need to call me. You need to call my firm. You need to go to lancedrurylaw.com. Evan, we're the liberation architects.
Yes,
Most
sir.
tax attorneys talk numbers. We talk financial freedom. We save people's businesses. We save people's marriages. We save their retirement accounts. We make sure their wages aren't garnished, that their assets aren't seized. This is what we do. And I think I've told you this before, but years ago, Evan, I was on a Sunday morning talk show in St. Louis, and I told the host, I'm the guy who saves Fay Ray from the clutches of King Kong. That's what we do. We do it every single day. We're a 4.8 out of 5 Google reviews in St. Louis. We're a 4.9 out of 5 in Nashville, Tennessee. We're the real deal. Evan, I'm 72. I know I don't look like it, but we're going to keep going here and we're going to open more offices. We're in Houston, we're in San Antonio. We keep growing the business. And I hope I can still help people out 10 years from now.
Oh, absolutely, man. You know, you in your prime, Lance Drury. You know what I mean? You ain't going nowhere.
There you go.
Thank you all for listening to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury. A bank account freeze can feel overwhelming, but quick action and with the right guidance, there's a real path forward. To learn more about Lance's work, get help with the IRS in this issue, you heard the man. Visit lancedrurylaw.com. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this to someone who may need this information. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.